Hello, this is Professor Warwath. I want to talk about kind of a part two to the Boeing McDonnell Douglas merger discussion. Um, in fact, this is an extension of the video that was discussing Boeing's cultural evolution and how Boeing evolved over the last 30, 40 years. Um, this is really meant to kind of augment that discussion because, frankly, I didn't spend enough time or energy on the merger with McDonnell Douglas, which for many people inside the company, this was a major shift. This was a major change. And you'll see why in a few moments. But, frankly, McDonnell Douglas had some significant problems with the DC-10 and or the MD and the MD-11 that followed in terms of hitting profitability, making a safe aircraft, having a good reputation in the field, and this is really a result of a disastrous McDonnell Douglas commercial aircraft performance. Frankly, McDonnell Douglas had a long-running reputation with the DC-9s, and those were good planes. Those were very good planes. But unfortunately, the DC-10 and the MD-11 really affected their reputation and their ability to sell aircraft. So in 1997, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas went through a merger, which was a major turning point in U.S. aerospace history. Boeing was technically the acquirer. Boeing's name was retained. McDonnell Douglas's name was set aside. And this is really an attempt to kind of understand why and how this cultural shift occurred inside the company and what happened to Boeing as a result of this merger. Before the merger, it's important to understand this engineering first culture. I'm planning to do a video on this in the near term on what an engineering first culture means. But frankly, it means that we're putting sound, good engineering principles in place, and we're sticking to them. DFM, for example, DFX, which is much more broad than DFM, but designing for repairability, maintainability, supportability, et cetera. So all of those things and making a good engineering decisions instead of decisions that are based purely on finance or purely on marketing, right? So this is really what eroded, I guess you could say, after the merger. But the engineering first culture was clearly in place prior to the merger, right? Long-term innovation prioritized over short-term profit. Having a long-term focus means that effectively you're not trying to optimize the next quarter. You're maybe looking out 5 or 10 years into the future. A reputation that Boeing had for rigorous testing, safety, and technical excellence, not compromising any of those things for finance or for expediency. The McDonnell Douglas culture was very different, right? Obviously, and they had their problems in the field, especially with safety and with quality. They were more financially driven, which meant that they were more time focused, getting product out on time, and getting, in essence, production at all costs. And in some cases, those costs might have been at the sacrifice of quality or safety. Emphasis on cost control, emphasis on efficiency, emphasis on shareholder value, right? In other words, McDonnell Douglas was financially driven, where Boeing was engineering driven, right? McDonnell Douglas had a history of struggling to fund new aircraft programs. So the MD-11 looked suspiciously like the DC-10 in many ways, with a lot of the same innovations and also some of the same problems that were inherited from one to the other, which concerned the community greatly and I believe it kept sales from going where they needed to go for the MD-11, which made the MD-11 basically a dead on arrival type program. So the acquired, in this case, McDonnell Douglas, took over the acquirer. What does that mean? It means from a management perspective, right? The leadership that was leading the post-merger Boeing was heavily influenced by McDonnell Douglas, right? The executives within McDonnell Douglas had backgrounds that wound up gaining key roles inside of Boeing, including strategy roles and finance roles. And the strategic priorities began to mirror McDonnell Douglas's approach as opposed to Boeing's approach. So even though Boeing was taking over a failed subordinate or a failed competitor, a lot of the failed policies came along with them and became part of the Boeing policies and procedures. So again, shift on shift in focus towards cost cutting, shareholder returns, and production speed, right? Decreased emphasis on engineering autonomy, safety-driven decision-making, and long-term R&D investment, right? So to get a sense of what key roles were moved, right? The first bullet basically talks about how Boeing's basically strategic direction after the merger took its culture and strategy from McDonnell Douglas, despite Boeing being the acquirer. So this shift implies that McDonnell Douglas executives were placed in roles that shaped corporate priorities, long-term planning, and financial strategy, right? The publication Quartz also notes that Boeing's commercial aviation department began reflecting McDonnell Douglas's struggling cost-driven culture. McDonnell Douglas executives took on leadership roles within commercial aircraft, influencing program management and resource allocation. The cultural shift included one that was basically profit-driven. So Boeing's post-merger shift became much more profit-driven, directly linking it to McDonnell Douglas's influence. Program management and operation with tighter production schedules, increased outsourcing, reduced engineering autonomy. So the bottom line is executives from McDonnell Douglas took control of strategic leadership, commercial aviation management, financial oversight, and program operations. This is the core of the business of Boeing. And somehow McDonnell Douglas took it over, right? Boeing's culture from engineering driven became one more of cost control and shareholder return focused, right? So to continue, they had more hierarchical management, more layers, more spans, more bureaucracy, right? Outsourcing became a much more critical theme for Boeing, where the 767 was highly outsourced. The 787 was outsourced even more, and far more. In fact, entire subsystems were outsourced to suppliers from around the world. Engineers' influence on decision making was weakened, so sound engineering decisions were set aside for sound financial decisions, right? Financial metrics became the dominant performance indicators. So what does this mean? What did this shift do to Boeing, right? Loss of Boeing's engineering identity, pressure to meet deadlines and budgets over technical rigor, growing disconnect between leadership and engineering teams. So a fracture, if you will. The engineering teams didn't feel like they were in control anymore. Their leadership had eroded. From there, you can see where manufacturing inconsistencies, design compromises, safety oversights, and issues contributed to later crises, such as the 737 MAX and the 787 program. So this merger fundamentally reshaped Boeing's culture from an engineering-driven one to a financially driven mindset. The cultural shift is widely viewed as a root cause of Boeing's modern challenges. So unfortunately, that's the way it looked. So again, this is to supplement the kind of evolution of the Boeing culture discussion from the prior video. This is filling in hopefully some of the gaps specific to the McDonnell Douglas acquisition. So thank you for your time.